The New York Times has called CAA protests rediscovery of the Indian Republic. Some commentators have gone on to say that these are protests for preserving the soul of India. Placards of Free Kashmir preserve the soul of India? What kind of rediscovery of the Republic is going to happen when slogans of Jinnah wali Azadi rent the air at the Shaheen Bagh protests in Delhi? The nucleus of all the CAA protests. I was really angry. What soul of India these protesters represent? Did they even know what price they themselves have paid for Jinnah wali Azadi? Jinnah wali Azadi means another division of the country. And it is clear that in CAA protests, India is witnessing the final fracture of Nehru's brand of secularism. Shaheen Bagh is just symptomatic of that. Some of my liberal friends were unhappy when early on I called these protests Muslim protests, even questioning my innate secularism. And then came the tweet storm of Shaila Rashid, till recently the toast of the secular lot, who asked her liberal friends to go to hell if they could not accept the inherently Muslim character of the CAA protests. A deluge of editorial opinion pieces followed in which the likes of Seema Chishti and Irina Akbar provided deeper ideological basis to what Rashid was lambasting her liberal benefactors for, that these were Muslim protests. Protests in Kerala and Lucknow used distinct Islamic imagery of Allahu Akbar and La ilaha illallah, making even the likes of Shashi Tharoor uncomfortable. This begs the question, are Muslims really scared and searching for their place in India due to Narendra Modi and Amit Shah? No, not at all. In a piece on Republic World, I showed how Indian Muslims have always chosen a wrong leadership, beginning at least with the Khilafat movement. Exactly a century ago, Mahatma Gandhi's fond hopes that supporting the patently pan-Islamist Khilafat movement would help co-opt great mass of Muslims into India's freedom struggle misfired, with the Muslim politicization effectively favoring Jinnah's separatism. Jinnah was catapulted as the chief spokesman of the community by Indian Muslims, rejecting the leadership of Nehru and Gandhi and Azad in the elections of 1937 and 1946. Explaining the victory of the Muslim League in the 1937 elections in the region that now constitutes Uttar Pradesh, Nehru wrote to Dr. Rajendra Prasad in a letter of July 21, 1937, and I quote, "We lost the election for two reasons. One, the cry of Islam in danger, and bribery on extensive scale. People were made to take the oath of Quran and they voted as a solid bloc against us." Remember, this is Nehru and not Modi or Shah. Now, if Islam was in danger in India under the leadership of Gandhi and Nehru, do you take this war cry seriously now if it is coming from CAA protesters? Please make your own judgment. Nehruvian secularism has been ostrich-like in its handling of the Indian state's relationship with its minorities, is my thesis, particularly Muslims. It provided a tenuous arrangement where the minorities could live in an island within the Republic, untouched with the needs of multicultural assimilation. In return of voting for the Congress party, the Muslims got a veto on anything that had constitutional progressivism written on it, beginning with the 1955 Code Bills, as Nehru himself realized. This continued through 1986, 2003 and is getting reflected in CAA protests in 2020 to mark the century of Khilafat, ironically. Ladida Farzana and Aisha Rena becoming symbols of this protest is deeply problematic. The two youngsters draw their entire inspiration exclusively from Islam, not from the secularism that Nehru would have wanted. Come to think of it, both the youngsters are from that utopia of secularism called Kerala, and not from the imagined Hindu Rashtra of Gujarat. Seema Chishti of the Indian Express quoted a speech by Maulana Azad, which he gave 3 months after independence from the pulpit of Jama Masjid in Delhi, in which he wanted each of them to stay back and not go to Pakistan. She was selectively quoting Azad. For in the same speech, a pained Azad had admonished Indian Muslims for having ignored him for their leadership and choosing to throw their lot with Jinnah instead. And I quote, "I called you and you cut off my tongue. I took my pen and you lopped off my hand. I wanted to walk and move and you tripped my foot. If you live with fear now, it is just retribution for your past deeds." Unquote. In his autobiographical account, India Wins Freedom, Azad wrote, and I quote again, "It is one of the greatest frauds of the people to suggest that religious affinity can unite. History is proof that after first few decades, Islam was not able to unite all the Muslim countries into one state on the basis of Islam alone." Unquote. CAA protesters clearly do not get Azad's message. For them, Jinnah wali Azadi remains attractive, and that's my beef with Nehru's secularism. If even the likes of Chishti have to quote Azad selectively, and a Deepika Padukone cannot be truthful in her reproduction of a real-life incident, we know the distance we have to travel before we become truly secular. The CAA protests are an inflection point in the Indian Muslims' relationship with the Indian state. The missing empathy for the persecuted refugees in Muslim protests is a marker of an urgent need for a new secularism construct that integrates rather than provide islands of autonomy in lieu of votes and a veto.